So what are some language ideas, topics, things that we can focus on when we start talking about bringing academic language into our view, into focus? What are some ideas of where to start? Let's start small, bring in little pieces of language acquisition, language development, language focus, and then we'll work toward planning for language to be embedded more and more in everything we do in very explicit ways. So that's our goal right now. A few of things you can do to get started right away are to start focusing on ideas for vocabulary development and sentence structure development. Those two pieces will start to get you moving toward that discourse and that focus on language that you want down the road. So here's the big picture. This is what we're going for. At the top of that structure there, academic discourse, that's our end goal. We are building the foundation to create the structure that will be capped off by academic discourse. That's the flow of our course here. At the bottom, the very foundation of our academic language and discourse is a solid foundation of word knowledge. That's your vocabulary. So we have always focused on vocabulary. We know that our content areas are chock full of new vocabulary, and we go about teaching it in different ways. One of the key things to think about when we say a solid foundation of word knowledge is not just introducing and teaching new vocabulary, but how do you keep it alive in the classroom once you teach it? How do you make sure that students are using it, not just you? And how do you model its proper use? How do you set expectations so that students know when they learn this new word, you want to hear it when they speak. You want to see it in their writing. How do you set those expectations of what to do with this vocabulary once they know it? That's where we'll start. From there, we can take all of this new vocabulary and we can start to make our language more developed. We can raise our proficiency levels by focusing on those supports in the middle, right? Our vocabulary isn't enough. We need the grammatical structures, different types of sentences, varying levels of sentence complexity, and proper uses and purposes for language to hold up our conversations and our discourse. So what does that mean? When we're focused on the sentence, right, we take these words and we're going to use them when we're speaking or writing, but how? So our grammar structures, we have to think about, is it present tense, past tense, future tense? Depends. If you're working in social studies, you're going to use a lot of past tense. You're going to use a lot of present tense. What's happening now? What's going to happen in the future? What are our current events? Types of sentences. Is this a cause and effect relationship? Is this a set of sequence steps? Is this just very simple language? Do I need more lengthy, complex, flowery language, more descriptive if I'm trying to be poetic or write a narrative? I want different levels of complexity. I want students to move toward more complex sentences so that they have longer ideas, more description, more justification, more sophistication. And the purpose for language goes back to our thinking verbs. Are they explaining? Are they justifying? Are they showing cause and effect? Are they citing evidence? What's our purpose for language? And then there are certain ways we say that and certain ways we write that. So we need to know so much about sentences and how we put them together. Once we have our goal of what we want to do with sentences in the context of our classroom today, this week, this unit, and our knowledge of the vocabulary that we're working into those sentences, then we can then move to our discourse where we take all of that information. We know how to speak about this subject, and we can get with a small group or a partner, and we can have a solid academic conversation that lasts a little bit, that is more sophisticated, that is longer and more complex, where students are taking 3, 4, 5 turns and justifying and explaining and showing what they know in a more sophisticated way. So that's our goal, is to move from our word knowledge. How do we put those in sentences? What kinds of sentences do we need for our purpose and our content? And then how do we put all that together to talk about it and then lead into writing? So let's start at the foundation, right? A solid foundation of word knowledge. I pulled this from Eric of different articles and studies. There's tons of research around the importance of expanding word knowledge. The greater your vocabulary, the greater access you have to all content areas, and the better your reading skills will be. It's just, there's nothing wrong ever with a focus on vocabulary. The only thing that goes wrong is if we stop there. Because remember, if we just focus on vocabulary, we get the foundation, but the rest of our building never happens. So when we talk about vocabulary, what are the things we want to do? So fostering word consciousness, just being aware of words, that some words are fun and some words are more sophisticated. I keep using that word. I can't think of another word. They are higher level than others. And what are our everyday words? What are our more specific and technical words? Like, how do we know when to teach? And there are some ideas around that. There, you can play word games, you can use teacher modeling, you can have conversation about it. We move up, providing rich and varied language experiences. Students can absorb a lot of vocabulary based on what goes on around them. Now, you know, I'm going to tell you that we need explicit and intentional instruction as well, but they do absorb a lot of vocabulary from the world around them. So how are we providing those rich and varied experiences so that students have the opportunity to absorb them? So oral language development, that's our discourse. The more time they spend talking to each other and talking about content, they will hear and try and use and pick up vocabulary from others. When you read aloud, when they do a wide range of reading, depending on their English proficiency level, it may need to be short passages at a time. You may do more read aloud with that group, but the more we read about a topic, a couple articles, a brief explanation, watch a video, the more exposure they have, the more vocabulary is absorbed. It's that repetition again. Exposure and repetition. Here we go to my point. Teaching individual words explicitly. We have to teach the words using student-friendly definitions. I think you can do an entire lifetime of teaching vocabulary with never opening the dictionary. Yes, using a dictionary is a skill that students should know. There probably aren't as many paper dictionaries around for our students as there were for us, and maybe it's a skill that's kind of becoming less and less needed. Yes, you need to be able to look up words, but what happens with our students, especially our English learners, is they look up that dictionary definition and the words in the definition are just as unclear to them as the word they're looking up. And so it just adds more confusion on top of confusion. So using student-friendly definitions, using context clues, getting students engaged, and again, multiple exposures and repetition. And you know, I love routines. So finding a vocabulary routine that works for you, that includes explicit teaching, it includes a student-friendly definition, and it includes some context of how this word would use and what it sounds like in real life. We'll show you some examples of that. And then as our students grow their vocabulary, they can start learning word learning strategies, like the use of the dictionary or more context clues. And they can do things like look at parts of words. So word part information. So if I know the word read and this is reading, then I know it has something to do with read. So what's that ing? If I'm looking at institution and I know institute, then I can kind of start figuring out what that might mean. So helping students notice parts of words they already know and building on is a great way to practice in the vocabulary world for students who are at that level of proficiency. In your download section, I put a tool for you, this academic language function toolkit. I love it. I think it's a wonderful tool to get you started in really thinking about academic language. The authors are included on the handout. This is another idea that came about with Dr. Kate Kinsella working with a school district, and they developed this. So what the Academic Language Function Toolkit does is take our thinking verbs, our most common verbs used in the classroom and in instruction, such as contrast, right? What's contrast? So it gives you words to focus on, talks about what graphic organizers you could use with that, gives you student-friendly definition, gives you sample sentence frames that go along with contrasting. You're going to like the Academic Language Function Toolkit. Got a little click crazy. On the other side, you see a snippet of an English Learner Portal tool, our thinking verb placemats. So we have thinking verb posters, thinking verb placemats. And what we're focused on with these tools is that you take the most common and useful verbs that students use and need to know, especially in assessments. They sometimes know the content, but they can't figure out what the question's asking. So a focus on these thinking verbs really helps. And it helps to have a simple definition and a visual that you always use with that verb so that students recognize it immediately. Again, routines, right? Routines and predictability. I always, when I'm telling students to analyze, I put this little icon on the worksheet, on the slide, on my board, next to my outcome, that they see the same visual, they hear the same action word, and they know what that means so that you don't have to spend so much time on directions. They can get right into the work and learn those thinking verbs and what's expected of them, and learn the language that matches, because the language of constructing is different than the language of contrasting. So we have to work on that and point that out.